It's Michelle May, Michelle, May, M-A-Y. I'm the Highway Safety Program Manager for the Ohio Department of Transportation.
Great. Okay. For our first question, how has ODOT integrated the safe system approach into its road safety initiatives? And could you discuss the challenges and successes encountered when implementing this in Ohio?
Yep, so the safe system approach is all the rage in transportation safety for good reasons. There are a lot of components to it, but from our perspective, we've tried to break it down into a few key elements that we're focused on. So when I think of the safe system approach, I first think of our having a priority and a focus on fatalities and serious injuries. So when I started in this position almost 20 years ago, we were in safety. We were focused. We were always focused on serious crashes, but we were also focused on crashes in general. And today we've really narrowed our focus where instead of looking at a lot of, we're integrating congestion-related crashes as well as fatalities and serious injuries. Now we've reprioritized our funding and our criteria to focus exclusively on fatalities, serious injuries, and injuries. So we want to make sure that we're preventing the worst types of crashes across the state. Second component of that is we've also retooled a lot of the things we do at ODOT in terms of safety around being more proactive. So for decades, people were very reactive about highway safety. We followed where fatalities and serious injuries were occurring instead of focusing on maybe high-risk roadway features where we could proactively put in safety improvements to prevent these types of crashes. This becomes very critical in our state because when we looked at 5 years worth of data, what we found is that only about 26% of our fatal locations occurred in the same spot. So that means there's a large universe of fatal crashes that are occurring that are random in nature. So we've shifted a lot of our resources to look at high-risk locations and roadway types so that we're not just running around chasing fatal crashes. Equitable, we think a lot of in terms of equitability. We want to make sure that when we are looking to address or prevent fatal and serious crashes, that we're focusing on communities that have the greatest need. Here again, we want to make sure that when we're making investments in roadway safety, that we're focusing on communities that have the greatest need. So we want you to have that same high level of safe infrastructure experience, whether you're in downtown Dublin or downtown Columbus. We want to make sure everybody has good, safe infrastructure. And so we've retooled a lot of our programs to make sure that we're giving more resources to those communities with greater need. The other big factor in the safe system approach that we're focusing on is more resources toward vulnerable road users. And here we're talking specifically about bicycles and pedestrians. In our state, as is happening across the country, the nature of travel is changing. Far more people are walking and biking than they've ever done before. And now, because so much of the culture, so much of the infrastructure for many decades was focused on vehicles, we're having to shift our focus and our resources and our investments to make sure that it's more multimodal. We want to make sure that we have good, safe, separate, and well-marked infrastructure for bicycles and pedestrians around the state. So we've significantly increased our investments in bicycle and pedestrian safety infrastructure. And then the final component that I think of when I think of safe system is speeds, lowering speeds. The higher the speed, the more likely a serious injury and a crash. That's true whether you're in a vehicle, but it's particularly true if you're walking or biking. So we've been thinking a lot lately about how we can shift our investments to make sure that we're trying to design safer roadway infrastructure that encourages slower speeds, particularly in communities where we know we have a mix of travel, people walking, biking, and using vehicles. So those are the primary components of a safe system approach and how we've shifted our program in Ohio to be more effective.
And then how does ODOT utilize data analysis to identify high crash locations and determine the appropriate intervention?
Oh, you know what? Can I?
Yeah.
You're going to cut this, right?
Yeah. Of course.
Okay, good. Okay, one thing I didn't answer is the success and challenges of safe
Yeah,
system
sure,
approach.
feel free.
So can I go back and
Yeah,
address
of
that? Is
course.
that okay? So one of the things that I wanted to mention is that by shifting our focus around the safe system approach, we have seen reductions in fatalities and serious injuries. So I'm going to give you an example. I just looked at the data for fatalities in 2024, down 7% compared to the year before. The year before that, it was down 2%. The year before that, it was down 6%. And this is after we had almost a decade of rising traffic deaths in our state. So the past 3 years, we've seen reductions in traffic deaths, which I think is because we've shifted our focus around the safe system approach and those key elements we talked about. Where we still have challenges, I think, is in addressing speed. Speed is a part of driving culture. People don't really think of speeding as going 5, 10, 15 miles over the speed limit. They tend to think in larger increments. But once again, they're just not thinking about the impact of what happens when you have a crash at those types of speeds. So we're still, the challenge is still trying to address speed from a cultural standpoint, a driver standpoint, but also from a roadway design standpoint. For years, we focused a lot of our investment in infrastructure on moving traffic more efficiently. And now we're going back and rethinking about what's safest for the community in which that roadway is traveling through. And what's often safer is slowing down speeds by sending people cues about the roadway design. So that's really one of the big challenges we're facing.
Then I'll repeat my question.
Yep.
Yeah.
Data analysis.
Yeah. How does ODOT utilize data analysis to identify high crash locations and then determine appropriate safety interventions?
So data analysis is at the heart of everything we do here. It determines where we focus our efforts, what kinds of recommendations we might make, and where we choose to make investments. We only have a limited amount of money, so we want to make sure that we're making investments in the right locations. From a data analysis standpoint, I think Ohio is leading the country in many ways about how we analyze safety data. We're using state-of-the-art methodologies, the highway safety that are in the highway safety manual, that are in how we prioritize corridors to both review them from a safety perspective and then invest funding. One of the things that we do now is we're very focused on using those state-of-the-art data analysis methodologies to focus on comparing similar roadway types, so that we're comparing apples to apples as oranges to oranges. And within those different roadway types, we're trying to find those locations which have higher than expected fatal and serious and injury crashes. And that's where we're really focusing our efforts. In the old days, we used to do what is known in the industry as chasing fatals. You go to a location where it recently had fatal or serious injuries. But what we typically find is by the time you developed a project and put in a roadway improvement, that those fatals and serious injuries had actually subsided and moved someplace else. We're trying to take out the anomalies in the data to make sure that we're focusing on where we can make safe roadway improvements for long-term safety benefit. We're also using new techniques. So we're using AI to do more data analysis. Over the past few years, we've been using machine learning to try and chunk through lots of different data sources so that we can determine which roadway characteristics or which roadway locations in the state of Ohio have the highest risk for fatal and serious injury crashes. Using AI allows us to crunch through a lot more data than we can do with traditional methods or using human beings. And then we can reassign people to then take that data to use it in other ways, working with communities to try and figure out, once we've identified high-risk locations, what kind of recommendations can we make? How can we fund safety improvements? I also wanted to mention that we're starting to use new data sources like telematics data. So telematics data, aggregated, anonymized cell phone data from cell phones, is giving us a lot of insights into driver behavior before a crash happens. It allows us to understand what people were doing, whether or not they were interacting with their handheld devices, or whether or not they were speeding in the seconds leading up to a crash. So it's giving us new data that we can add to our traditional sources of data like crash data to draw a more complete picture that will help us improve safety on our roads. Final thing that I would mention is near-miss data. We've been talking to a lot of companies these days about technology that helps us determine, once again, where are almost crashes occurring. So we know where a crash is occurring. We can get that from the crash data. But where do we have locations where we have a lot of near misses that haven't shown up in the crash data? That helps us develop, again, risk profiles for different roadways, where we can be more proactive in addressing safety before crashes start to pile up.
So actually, two follow-up questions.
Yeah.
On that. So I know we were talking about like using cell phone data and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that some privacy concerns get raised. So
Yep.
how would we mitigate that?
This is where it's easy for a DOT to slide in because the insurance industry has already gone through this. So telematics data is something that's been used for many years in the insurance industry. It's been vetted for privacy concerns. They've applied very rigorous standards for anonymizing and aggregating the data, making sure that no personal data is being consumed by other users. This is where we are following a long tradition that's already been, these concerns have already been addressed in many ways by the insurance industry and the government agencies that are regulating insurance industries. So we only deal with data providers that meet the most rigorous standards for making sure the data is anonymous and aggregated and not susceptible to data breaches. But it's definitely a safety concern. I have to address that question every time we talk about using cell phone data. Yeah.
So, and then also, we were talking about the safe system approach, and then the goal, I mean, at least how you were saying it, is to eliminate all fatalities.
Yes.
And then we're also looking at near-miss data. So could you explain like the distinction there?
Yeah, and I will say that we're still struggling with how to use the near-miss data. Not because we don't think it's valuable, just because we have so much information that we can access and use, and we have a limited amount of resources to address known crashes, let alone near-miss crashes. However, we're starting to use the data to think about, once again, those developing risk profiles for different roadway types, different roadway segments. We think it could be valuable for us to look at it in the future, but there's no question that our first priority is, taking a lot of the existing crash data that we have and trying to effectively use it to prevent those types of crashes.
Right. Okay. Then, my next question. Yeah. So how extensively is ODA using artificial intelligence to enhance like each of the 5 system elements, and has it had a profound impact on road safety?
So once again, this is something very new to us. We're typically used to just using the crash data, the roadway inventory data, and engineering expertise to figure out what to do with it all. We're just now getting into AI. We've only really used it in the safety realm the past 2 years. It's primarily being used to help us with systemic safety, where we're proactively looking to make safety investments. And we're going to proactively doing it by developing profiles on what are our riskiest roadway types in the state. That's really where we're using AI to crunch through a lot of data to help us develop that risk profiles. What we're finding from both the crash data and the risk data there are a lot of target-rich opportunities. I'll give you an example. Arterials. Arterials in our states, particularly urban arterials, tend to be target-rich environments for addressing serious and fatal crashes in our state. They tend to be our riskiest corridors. So if we can not only target those riskiest corridors from a crash data perspective, but also from a proactively from a risk profile basis, making proactive safety improvements in many of these areas, it's 8% of the roadway network where this majority of crashes are occurring. And if we can focus on that 8% of the roadway network in making safety improvements, it could have huge benefits in terms of future crash reductions.
Then, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
What steps? I mean, so I know we were talking about the focus on fatalities,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a new thing that's emerging called like Vision Zero.
Yep.
Which is eliminating all fatalities. So
Yep.
how extensively, or what is the plan for ODOT to achieve that goal if we're trying to achieve it?
So in my mind, Vision Zero, safe system approach, they're all wrapped up in the same basic principles. Focus on fatalities and serious injuries, focus on both proactive and reactive, a focus on vulnerable road users, which are bicycles and pedestrians, which, we've seen an increase in pedestrian deaths in our state and across the nation. Speed, speed and design. In the old days, in my business, speed was thought of as a driver problem. We need to get drivers to go slower. Now our discipline is evolving, and we recognize that there's a lot we can control with the design of our roadways. How we design our roadways sends cues to drivers about whether or not they should be going fast or slow. And so as a part of Vision Zero, one of the big things that we're focusing on is how to encourage the speeds we want through roadway design. But I very much see Vision Zero and safe system approach and all the ways in which we've changed our program, how we're looking at the data, how we're making transportation investments. It's all wrapped up in that one concept, and they have very similar components.
And then, looking ahead, what are your top priorities for advancing road safety in Ohio for the next 5 years?
So for the next 5 years, I'm really focused on two things. I'm focused on continuing to increase our investments in pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure, separate where possible, well marked where we can't separate those streams of travel. Over the past 5 years, I think we've doubled our investment in pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure as a result of Vision Zero and safe system efforts within our state. Our governor has been very focused on safety. We've significantly increased the amount of funding for both our safety programs and these pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure elements. So very focused on pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure. Second thing is we're going to continue working on speed and design, speed and roadway design. We want to make sure that the investments we're making, not just in the safety program, but all transportation our investments, are looking at the context of the community. Who is traveling within that community? How fast should the speeds be? Not based on some, definition of law, but what is the context of the community around that roadway? What is the safest speed for the people using that roadway? And then making sure that we're designing roadway elements that encourage the types of speeds that are appropriate for that community. When I'm talking about that, I'm talking about if you have a roadway with an urban context where you have bikes, pedestrians, and vehicles, you have a lot of dense development. Maybe it's both business and it's both residential. We want to make sure that we're putting in things like dedicated sidewalks, separated bike lanes where possible, where we have good high visibility crossings, where we have mid-block crossings, not just at intersections, where we have curb bump outs at intersections where people are crossing, where we have on-street parking, street trees. All of these things send visual clues to drivers that I'm in a different environment. I need to slow it down. I need to pay attention and look for the people around me to make it safer. That's really a big focus of what we want to do over the next several years.
And then the prompt for this video competition is pretty much, oh yeah. It's fine, don't worry about it. I mean, we'll mainly just be using this camera, so it's all right. Yeah, okay. So the main prompt for this video is for the new presidential administration,
Mhm.
right after Inauguration Day, what are the first actions that the president should take? So with regards to this topic, I mean, I know we've made like significant advancements in AI right now, but what can also be done to significantly improve it even more?
So when it comes to AI, I think it's more just a matter of, when I think about the role of the federal government is very good about taking best practices and helping states understand how they can be used and then helping them access the resources to actually use them. So AI is something that if the federal government wants to help us do better, developing best practices, providing the resources so that we can tap into more AI resources, apply them directly to safety. That's really a good role for the federal government. When I think about the Safe System approach and Vision Zero and some of the things that they've done previously, where they've been great is developing case studies, developing research to prove that using these types of data, techniques, technology, that it actually works in reducing crashes. All of that is great information to provide to states so that we can actually implement AI and other types of techniques that I think ultimately will help us reduce fatalities and serious injuries on our roads.
And then going a while back, I mean,
Yeah.
we were talking about the shift to like reactive to proactive.
Yeah.
So could you explain a bit more about what exactly the proactive approach is?
So proactive is instead of saying we have fatalities and serious injuries that have occurred in the past 3 years at this location. Instead, it's looking holistically at the system and trying to predict where fatal and serious injury crashes are more likely to occur. Let's not wait until crashes pile up. Let's figure out where is it most likely to happen. When we look at safety now, we're looking at certain roadway characteristics, roadway types that are more prone to fatal and serious injury crashes. In the state of Ohio, we know, both from risk profiles and from crash data, that most of our fatalities and serious injuries are most likely to occur on just 8% of our roadway network, and that's arterials. Knowing that kind of information, having that data available, makes it possible for us to focus our efforts on those areas so that we could have a larger impact on improving safety in our state.
Great. Then I think I should. What message would you like to convey to the public about their role in contributing to a safer road environment?
I think drivers are very, I think drivers should take responsibility for how important it is to drive attentive and safely when you're using public roads. I think we take for granted driving. And so things like speeding, things like looking at your phone, because people have done it in the past and haven't had a crash, they don't think too much about it. It just becomes part of normal behavior. I can tell you from the data, everybody, you may not have a crash every single time you engage in that behavior, but eventually people have crashes. And that crash could be severe or it could be minor, but you can't predict when it's going to happen. So I guess the point is, I believe drivers play a significant role in safety on our roads. We share these roads. People need to be responsible. The two biggest things I see that drivers could do to make our roads safer is to put down their phones, to pay attention to the road, and to slow down, especially in those communities where we know we have people walking and biking. It's so very important. It's such an easy thing to do. I just wish more people would do it. Slow down, phones down.
And then going back to the topic of AI,
Yeah.
I know we were talking about in like traffic management,
Mm-hmm.
but also in the case of like we've seen things like AVs and ADAS systems. So what I guess what do you envision for the future of that, and how do we address kind of the skepticism around it?
Do you want to know the truth? I'm not really an expert in autonomous vehicles. I mean, we keep thinking that it's coming eventually, but I'm not. It's not really my area of expertise. So,
Okay.
yeah, not sure I can answer that
Okay,
question.
that's fine.
Yeah.
Right, but put the question like, do you think the AV and ADAS also
Yeah.
of this safety
On safe
rules.
system approach, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, most definitely. Really, AI is like anything. It's people are skeptical until they start using it or seeing how it's used and the benefits of it. So if I go back to things like roundabouts, 10 years ago, people hated roundabouts. You could not convince people to support a roundabout. And now, fast forward to today, now that they've been built, people see how they've been used, people see the fact that it does significantly reduce serious crashes, prevents fatalities. People are much more accepting of roundabouts. I kind of view AI in that regard too, right? Like there has to be a few people to get out ahead of it, to try it, to show other people that it works, and then other people will gravitate toward it and want to use it. There are the early adopters, the mid adopters, and the late adopters, and you know, proving that things work and how they can practically be used. I think that's the key to getting public acceptance.
And then we were also talking about, getting drivers to drive slower, get off
Yeah.
their phones and things like that.
Yeah.
So,
It's an issue.
yeah. So, how would we approach the whole public outreach thing? Like, how do we get to people? Because I know we were talking
Yep.
about the safe system approach of designing roads
Mhm.
so that they're encouraged to not speed. But
Yep.
how do we also reach out to drivers?
Boy, I tell you, it's hard. It's hard to get people to change behaviors. I mean, I work in the highway safety industry. My friends know that. And yet I still get into a car where if somebody gets in the back seat, they don't wear a seatbelt. I have to tell them to put on a seatbelt. It is very hard. I would like to think that it starts with, you know, in some ways, I think it's about the culture of learning, right? If I think about seatbelt use, I think about being a young child and people using seatbelts and growing up with seatbelts, and so they use seatbelts, right? So I definitely think you have to start early. The problem with things like speeding and distracted driving is it's culturally accepted. Like if I told you that I drove drunk last week, you would shame me for that, and rightly so. But if I told you that I touched my phone or looked at my phone at a stoplight, which I would never do, but if I told you that, there would be no shaming as a part of that, right? Likewise, if I tell you that I typically go 5 to 10 miles over the speed limit, most people would go, oh, I do too, because it's culturally acceptable. I don't know what the answer is. I just know that we need to, on a similar trajectory to, drunk driving, we need to convince people that it's no longer culturally acceptable to look at your phones or speed through a community because it endangers other people. Hard to do, but that's really that's where we need to be.
Yeah.
Let's take the road to Vision Zero.